It is official. Sean Diddy Combs has been sentenced in his federal criminal case. We are going to discuss everything that happened inside that courtroom, including the bombshell decision by the judge. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Today was the day. After 2 years from when Cassie Ventura Fine filed her lawsuit against Sean Combs, after an investigation, after a raid, after the Cassie tape was published by CNN, after an apology video, after an arrest, after multiple indictments, superseding indictments, after an 8-week trial over the summer where Sean Diddy Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking, but convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, namely transporting people across state and international lines for sex work, he was sentenced for his crimes today. Judge Arun Subramanian in federal court in downtown Lower Manhattan sentenced the rap mogul. Just handed down the sentence a few minutes ago at the time of this recording. Now, to be clear, why this is such a big deal, other than the fact that Sean Combs has been sentenced for federal sex crimes, we had no idea what the actual sentence will be. There is no pro forma mandatory sentence here, like a life in prison. It's just a standard. We know what's going to happen. No, there was a range for this judge. The defense was asking for no more than 14 months in prison. And since Sean Combs had already served about 13 months in the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, he essentially would be out in no time if that was the case. The prosecution was asking for 11 years. The probation department that did its own analysis recommended 7 years and 3 months. There was a range. We did not know what the sentence would be. We are going to get into everything that happened today, including what it was like in that courtroom when the sentence was handed down. And to do that, I want to bring back on Queen Elizabeth Millner, Law&Crime Zone. She was inside that courtroom not only for today, for every day of this trial. This is the conclusion of quite a saga. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. First, I want to start off, how did Sean Combs look? Okay, that was a big question. I know we have courtroom sketches that came out. How did he look? How did he appear? What was his demeanor? We'll talk about the statement he made in court, but just how did he look?
Yeah, well, Jesse, you can imagine how big of today actually was for Sean Combs. I mean, he was going to be learning his fate. And to your point in your intro earlier, we didn't know where that range would really lie. Could it be on the tail end of that being time served and he could possibly leave walking out of the doors? We didn't know if that was going to happen. We didn't know if he was possibly going to get double-digit sentence. So I think the weight of the world you could kind of feel when he walked inside the courtroom today. He was wearing casual clothes, civilian clothes, so he wasn't in his MDC tan jumpsuit or anything like that, like he was at the last hearing that happened just last week. But today he appeared in a tan sweater, white undershirt, dark pants, similar to the looks that he was appearing in during trial. And then when he walked inside the courtroom today, Jesse, he waved at his family. He did kind of like a little prayer hand, but he did seem a little bit nervous. And I think it's possibly because they just didn't know where the sentencing would go. And so he sat at the defense table with his glasses, and then the proceedings began. But you can only imagine what was really going on in his mind as soon as he walked in, saw his family, saw the amount of people inside that courtroom, because Jesse, it was a packed house today, body to body, person to person. There was no seat left unseated today inside that courtroom.
Real quick, talk to me about that. I heard there was 30 people in the front rows that were friends and family of Sean Combs. Anybody notable?
So Jesse, today inside the courtroom, it really was a kind of a little bit of a who's who was in there. I mean, everyone from Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, Keisha Combs, Diddy's sister, Dallas Austin, who was a music producer, he was inside that courtroom today. Sean Combs' children, that being Jesse and Delilah Combs, the twins. It was Quincy Brown who was there, Justin Combs was there, Christian Combs was there. But I think what was interesting, Jesse, and a notable guest, at least to me, was alleged victim number 3, and that being Gina Hun. She came inside the courtroom a little bit later than the rest of the family, so she wasn't seated directly beside them. She was seated kind of more towards the back of the courtroom on the defense's side. So we did see her inside that courtroom today. And I think also another notable figure that I learned through this trial was a person named Rue, and that was Ruben, who was one of Sean Combs' security guards. He was inside the overflow courtroom. He didn't make it into the main courtroom, but he was present inside the courthouse. But other notable names names that were inside that courtroom today, Jesse, were LaWanda Lane, who is a good friend of Kim Porter, who's also been reportedly taking care of the twins since Sean Combs has been incarcerated. Dana Tran, who is the mother of Sean Combs' youngest daughter, Love, she was inside that courtroom. Sarah Chapman, who is Chance's mother, was inside that courtroom. Misa Hilton, who is Justin's mother, was inside that courtroom. Charlucci, who's been a fixture throughout all of the trial, throughout all of the pretrial hearings even, too. One of Sean Combs' very good friends was inside that courtroom. Karen Agnifilo, lead attorney Mark Agnifilo's wife, was there, too. And so it really was just kind of a who's who, especially of Sean Combs' family and close friends. But I will say there wasn't any huge names that we were expecting, like a possible Ye sighting or anything like that we saw inside the main courtroom.
So if you're a fan of Sidebar, then you know we cover a lot of cases here at Law&Crime. And you might be wondering, how are we able to share so many clips with our followers from inside the courtrooms of our hottest trials? Well, I'll let you in on a secret. We use a platform called Opus Clip. It is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it easier and faster to cut, create, and upload videos across all social media platforms. So through the use of AI, Opus Clip automatically generates B-roll, it cleans up audio, and it reframes your videos for any platform. And Opus Clip, it is so easy to start using. I'm going to show you how right now. All you got to do is go to opus.pro/sidebar, sign up, and then you upload a video. And in just a few minutes, you'll have tons of perfectly edited clips ready to go. So whether you're making videos for TikTok or Shorts or Instagram Reels, Opus Clip is your one-stop shop for getting your best content seen by more viewers all across all these different platforms with the press of just one button. And if you're wondering, how good are these AI edited videos from Opus Clip? Just look at our content here at Law&Crime. Our producers have used this to help us cut and share clips of some of our most major trials. And having a tool like Opus Clip means we can get you even more viral updates from inside the courtroom faster than ever before. And at Sidebar, we know our listeners have a lot of opinions and ideas to share. And this is the most powerful tool there is to help you edit like a pro and grow your own audience. So give it a try for yourself. Go to opus.pro/sidebar to start creating your own videos today. Mia wasn't there. Now, Mia had prepared a letter in support of a harsh sentence against Sean Combs. She had testified against Sean Combs, said that he sexually assaulted her. The defense had objected to her appearing in court today, to providing a statement, and in a shock, she wasn't there.
Yeah, she wasn't there at all. And it was kind of a big shocker, to your point, Jesse, that she wasn't there, because we thought that she would be inside the courtroom. And we were kind of curious who the government witnesses who would be there to give their final victim impact statements ahead of the judge giving down Sean Combs' sentencing. But today, right off the bat, Christy Slavic, who is a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, she said Mia no longer wishes to give an impact statement. She had submitted that written statement, and that the tone of the defense letter, I think, was what really kind of changed her mind as to coming into the courtroom today. And I can only imagine probably how Mia feels specifically. She's using a pseudonym even to testify, even as she's writing letters to the court, because of just the fear that she has been getting in terms of what she believed to be backlash, either from Sean Combs or his fans, or even just the attention that it's that the case has brought against her too. And so I was very surprised that she didn't attend court in person today, but I can understand why, because even the judge said to Mark Agnifilo today that the tone of the defense's letter in response to Mia giving a victim impact statement was just completely inappropriate. And it was a pretty harsh letter, Jesse. I'm sure that you've already read it, but it was kind of a very harsh tone, and it was kind of similar a little bit to her cross-examination too.
Now let's talk about the prosecution. So prosecutors today, they outlined their argument in court. It echoed a lot of what their filings were in anticipation of this sentencing. What were some of the key arguments, the themes that stood out today about why they say it was justified for Sean Combs to have a lengthy sentence? Remember, they were asking for 11 years. How did they justify it today? What were the arguments they made in court?
Well, today, Christy Slavic, making the arguments on behalf of the government, she said that today is about accountability and justice. And she was talking specifically about accountability, Jesse. She was talking about the conduct that was lasting for a 15-year period. I mean, even if you go back to the superseding indictments where it says this conduct went on from 2009 all the way to 2024, that's a long period of time. And so from the government's perspective, they really just wanted accountability from the defendant, that being Sean Combs. And then they also wanted justice particularly for the victims. I know when we often talk about the Sean Combs case, the Diddy case, the P. Diddy case, he is the focus of this, but I think a lot of people have to remember that there were victims in this case, that being Cassie Ventura, that being Jane, that also kind of also applying to some of the charges that he was acquitted for too, where you can also bring in like Mia and Capricorn Clark and Deontay Nash. And so I think the government from their perspective was really trying to speak on behalf of all of those people. And so today, Chrissy Slavic, again, she was saying that the law requires the court to know all about the defendant and the defendant's conduct. This isn't just a case about freak-offs and hotel nights. It's about a man who did horrible things to people. He weaponized currency against victims. They were talking about that even though he was convicted just on the Mann Act charges, that it's also kind of in relation to the violence, and that the defendant didn't understand or doesn't understand how harsh his conduct was, and that his respect for the law was just something as simple as lip service. And so, yes, the government was asking for a far steeper penalty and punishment when it came to Sean Combs' sentencing. They were hoping for those double digits, and I think they were kind of opposed to the whole split the baby method, as Christy Slavic said today in court. And so they did want a harsher end of the sentencing today. And I think as far as the judge is concerned and what his ultimate sentence would be, it kind of ended up being a kind of happy medium a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And the defense, number of defense attorneys spoke. I think almost all of them. You had Xavier Donaldson, you had Brian Steele. What were some of the themes they were focusing on in terms of why Sean Combs deserves a lenient sentence, why 14 months would be appropriate?
Yeah, so right off the bat, Jason Driscoll making the arguments on behalf of the defense, because Jesse, yes, it was Jason Driscoll who spoke, it was Nicole Westmoreland who spoke, Xavier Donaldson who spoke, Mark Agnifilo and Brian Steele. That's 5 of his, 9 defense attorneys who all spoke in court today. So as far as Jason Driscoll is concerned, he was saying that the defense says that Combs didn't make money off of the Mann Act convictions that he was charged, and that was kind of a big theme in terms of his argument today, and that the defense submitted 300 cases of Mann Act cases where it talked about pimps and minors being trafficked, immigrants being transported, homeless people being transported, all of that stuff. And so that was kind of the theme, at least from Jason Driscoll's point of view, and that the defense also saying that Ms. Slavic, Christy Slavic, who is one of the federal prosecutors, blamed Mr. Combs for having a drug addiction for 25 years, something that they were also talking about, how he had been addicted to drugs going back at least to 2000. And so a lot of his conduct might be not necessarily excused because of his drug addiction, but they say that might be kind of the underlying reason. And then when you get to Nicole Westmoreland, she was talking about Sean Combs' inspiration and his commitment at MDC Brooklyn, where she was talking about all of his successful businesses. She was talking about how he started a record label from the ground up. She was talking about his clothing line. She was talking about his television company, that being Revolt, and that's where she started to really kind of get emotional, where she was saying that Sean Combs spent a majority of his adult life really trying to help the Black community, really trying to give back to the community, that he isn't this larger than life persona, he's just a man who makes mistakes. When it came to the other defense attorneys speaking, Brian Steele was just very urging of the judge to please consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma throughout his life. Brian Steele urged the judge to consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma in his life, and that there have been times in Sean Combs' life, especially when he had drugs in his system, that there were times where he had flatlined and that he was trying to be a better version of himself. And I feel like, Jesse, that was really the theme of all of what the defense was saying, that these 13 months were really reflective of Sean Combs. He wants to be a better person. He wants to leave the past in the past and be a better person for the future. And so even when it came to Xavier Donaldson, he was speaking about how Sean Combs should receive a just punishment. He brings up intent when he talks about Sean Combs' conviction of the Mann Act charges, and that Sean Combs isn't just a pimp, and that he was talking about his work at MDC Brooklyn, where Xavier Donaldson said, we've had assemblymen and politicians, billionaires in MDC, but nobody besides Sean Combs was there to actually help out the other detainees and the other inmates there. And then finally with Mark Agnifilo, he was his whole argument was that domestic violence comes with childhood trauma. So I feel like the defense was really kind of trying to pull at the heartstrings a little bit of the judge and even possibly the public too, because this was their final say to all of the people, all of the media coverage that this case has brought attention to. And so I think at the end of the day, from the defense's perspective, they wanted everyone, including the judge, to just look at Sean Combs as a man who made terrible, terrible mistakes, and whether or not he's been punished enough for it, that was kind of what the judge had to consider today.
By the way, I think it was interesting that I think the prosecution said in response that only one of the 5 defense lawyers who spoke actually mentioned the victims. It was very much Sean Combs focused. Now, I say that because Sean Combs did something very interesting when he spoke. He mentioned the victims. We'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I wasn't in that courtroom, but I will tell you, I reading about this, I could feel the emotion that came out when Sean Combs' children provided statements. That felt like a turning point. The judge would later reference the children. Talk to us about who spoke, what they said, and what was it like in that courtroom?
Well, I think it's a moment that a lot of people were anxious to hear, not only from Sean Combs himself, but Sean Combs' children, who, I mean, we do have to admit, Jesse, they have been through a lot throughout the duration of Sean Combs' civil litigations, all the way going into his federal case, too. And so when the Combs children came up for the victim impact statements, they all came up together. They really were showing kind of a solidified, solid unit when they were up at that podium speaking in front of the judge. I will say the only exception of Sean Combs' 7 children was the fact that his 2-year-old daughter, Love, wasn't there inside the courtroom. So in terms of who was speaking, it was all of them, again, except baby Love. But Quincy spoke first. And so one thing people have to note about Quincy is that Sean Combs isn't his biological dad. Albie Shore actually is. And so, but what Quincy said when he first spoke to the judge, because he was the first one up, he is also the oldest child too, is that he is our father. In front of us, he's a changed man. Week after week, we see him evolve. Our father will never do anything to jeopardize his freedom ever again. Then Justin Combs spoke next. He's the second oldest son. Justin Combs said, "Please give our father a second chance. This has been the toughest time he's ever been through. This time saved my father's life. I talk to my father every day. He's changed for the better. I ask you to see my father the way I do." Christian Combs was next, and Christian Combs kind of also brought kind of the personality here a little bit too, Jesse, where he says, you know, I'm the one who people say I look the most like my pops. I studied my dad up and down. He's my superhero. He taught me to treat women with respect. So he said the past year I had to travel across the country to see him for 2 hours. He's changed. I see in his eyes as his twin that he's changed. Please give my family grace and please give him mercy. But really, Jesse, where the heartstrings were with the girls, and that was Jesse Combs, Chance Combs, and Delilah Combs, who were speaking today. Jesse Combs, who spoke first as far as the daughters go, she broke down immediately when she got up to that podium and started speaking. She said, "We aren't here to excuse his mistakes. We need him in our life. I lost my mom, her mom being Kim Porter, when I was very young. He promised to be there to keep us safe." Then Chance Combs, she had spoke, and she said that we're just his daughters, but we do need our father. When we talk, he speaks with a clear mind. He's more patient. He's thoughtful. He wants to be a better man, a better father. He's parented our 2-year-old sister from jail, and I saw glimpses of our father. Our sister deserves a father who's present to teach her how to ride a bike, to tuck her in at night before she goes to sleep, something that any kid would want. And then the final child who spoke on behalf of the family was Delilah Combs, and she said that we're scared of the thought of not having our mom and our dad in our life. She says that these are the years that we'll never get back. I know that much of the missing years hurt because we have lost our mom. We already lost so much. Please, Your Honor, give our family the chance to heal together. Not as a headline, but we're trying to do better. And so I think from just like a human perspective, it was very emotional. I mean, you couldn't help but feel for the children, especially his daughters, because some of his children have lost both parents. But, you know, I was wondering, would their impact statement have any sway on the judge, who I believe that had already made up his mind going into sentencing? And so it was interesting just to hear just the emotional impact of what they've been through before Sean Combs was ultimately sentenced.
I think it did. I think it did have an impact on him. He mentioned something about the children later on. Again, we'll get to that. We're teasing it up because it was significant what the judge said. The judge would end up referencing not only Sean Combs, but the children and the victims too. We'll get to that. All of this was coupled by something I don't think I've seen in a sentencing. There was a video, an 11-minute video that was created by the defense that was played in court. What exactly was this video?
Well, this video, to me, Jesse, I kind of thought was a little bit of a love letter to Sean Combs, whether it was to the judge, whether it was to us in the public. I was kind of curious about where the direction was going, because we did see the video prior to it being shown in court today. So I did get a glimpse of it where I saw bits and pieces of the many accomplishments Sean Combs had. And I think that's one thing that nobody can take away from him, is that he did have incredible accomplishments, such as the record label, the fashion label, the fact that he was starting charter schools in the inner city, the fact that he was trying to raise money, the fact that he was getting more black and brown people in order to vote and do their civic duty, all of that sort. And so I think in terms of just what the video was to show that this is who Sean Combs is, but there were also glimpses of what he's like as a dad. And so there were moments where we saw him and his children together, and this was all of his children, going from his oldest child going to his youngest child, that being his daughter Love. And so we really got to see what it was like for him not to be this quote unquote larger than life person, but really to see what he is like as both him during his career and him as a father. And so it was a very humanizing video. It was about 11 minutes long. It was a very interesting glimpse into his life, kind of post all of the civil litigation, the federal case, all of that sort. And so some of the even quotes from it was, let's go, and that means to be positive. And so I think that was kind of the theme of this, was just positivity and just how positive Sean Combs has been to certain people's lives during certain moments of his life.
We got to talk about the big moment. This was the moment we were all waiting for. Sean Combs made a statement. Now, he provided a letter to the court in anticipation of this. It seems like what he said maybe echoed a lot of what he wrote in the letter. He talked about his time in the MDC. He talked about he can't change the past, but he can change the future, that he could be a force for good. He mentioned the victims. He mentioned how sorry he was. This was an important moment, though, because this is the first real opportunity he had since all of this began to substantively address the allegations, to address the charges, to address Jane, to address Cassie. This was his opportunity. He stayed silent the entire trial, as he was supposed to. He didn't take the stand. Talk to us about what he said in court today. And we weren't there. What was his tone like? How were people reacting to this? Because that wasn't captured.
Yeah, so honestly, Jesse, even right from the beginning, it was kind of a dramatic moment in a sense, because right off the bat, when the judge said, Sean Combs, I'll give you a moment, take however much time you need. And so we're all waiting for him to say the first word. Would he sit down while he's giving his impact statement? Would he stand up? We didn't know what was happening, because he really took like a good minute to, I think, kind of compose himself. And then he stood up, he took a deep breath into the mic, which we did hear, which was audible. And he said right off the bat, I want to thank you for giving me a chance to speak up for myself. It's the hardest thing for me to do was to not speak throughout all of this. He wasn't one to be giving out TV interviews or talking about this case or anything like that. From behind bars, even prior to his incarceration, he didn't do any of that. And so it was interesting to hear, what was he going to say? Was he going to say Cassie Ventura's name? Was he going to say Jane? We didn't know. And so when he said right off the bat, the hardest thing for me to do was not speak. I want to apologize again to Cassie Ventura for any pain that I caused emotionally or physically. I mean, we all kind of know where we were when that Intercontinental Hotel video from 2016 dropped on CNN, and that video was hard to kind of take out of anyone's mind. And so him saying right off at the top of his speech that he apologizes for any pain that he caused to Cassie emotionally or physically, that was kind of the first time we were hearing him say her name in that respect, because even when you go back to the apology video, he didn't say her name. As we learned through trial, it was kind of advised for him not to say her name. But and then when it came to Jane, he said, I would like to apologize to Jane, not using Jane's real name, but said, I didn't mean to hurt you. I would like to apologize to all of the victims of domestic violence too. So really, I think from the defense's perspective, I think that their whole kind of strategy in a way, Jesse, was to kind of get in front of the whole domestic violence aspect, something that I think that they knew the judge would take into consideration eventually when he would sentence him. And so even when Sean Combs was speaking, he said, it'll always be a burden that I'll have to carry. My actions were shameful and disgusting. I was out of control. I needed help. I didn't get the help. He said, I got lost in my journey of life. I'm not this larger than life person. I got lost in the excess. I got lost in my ego. I lost all of my businesses, my career, my reputation. I lost myself, my self-respect. I've been humble. I hate myself right now. I've been stripped down to nothing. But I think one big thing, Jesse, one notable thing that he was really kind of getting choked up on his words when he was giving his speech is when he stood up, or he was already standing up when he was giving his impact statement, but when he turned around to his family, specifically his children, he was getting very choked up. He said, I failed y'all as a father. You deserve better. Even though talking to his mother, where he said, to my mother, I failed you as a son. I'm sorry. He said, I failed my community. I wanted to be a shining example of what people could do, what we could do. If given a chance, another chance, you know, he wanted to explain to the judge that people can change. And even towards the end of his speech, Jesse, he was saying, you know, I thank the jury for my acquittal, but he still says, I take my Mann Act convictions very seriously. I want you to make an example of what a person can do if they're given another chance, because from the government's perspective, they were hoping that the judge would kind of make a case out of Sean Combs, especially given his wealth, especially given his clout, and the fact that the government alleged that his conduct had been going on for such a long amount of time. And so what Sean Combs said in response to that was, I would never jeopardize being away from my family, no matter what anyone says. And I think that was kind of a little snide to the government there. He says, no matter what anyone says, I'm truly sorry. And so it felt apologetic. It did feel, to your point, Jesse, a little repetitive of the letter that he had already sent to the judge. And honestly, Jesse, it felt kind of a little similar to the apology video after the Intercontinental Hotel video had dropped too. But it seemed like he was remorseful for his actions.
That's really interesting you say that, because look, from a legal point of view, I thought it was significant that he mentioned the victims. At first, I thought he was trying to apologize for everything in a way where he wasn't directly admitting to his convictions. But he did say at the end, I take responsibility for my Mann Act convictions. I thought he might not say that directly. Like, he didn't say, I'm sorry I transported these women across state lines for the purposes of sex work. He wasn't that specific. But the fact that he did apologize for the Mann Act convictions, I thought was significant, considering some would say, oh, he may not want to jeopardize his appeal. He may not want to admit fully that he committed these crimes. But he did, in a sense. The question I had was, and you tell me, did it seem genuine? Because reading it, it felt like he was very remorseful, and him saying that he doesn't want to be made an example of about what he did, but make an example of me about what I can do, given a second chance. It felt remorseful to me. It felt credible, but I wasn't in the courtroom. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, I think kind of from the defense's perspective, it really was kind of pulling at the heartstrings to really kind of bring out the tears in a sense. So to me, it did feel a little bit that he was remorseful, but at the same time, it did also feel like this was just everything that had already been said in the many of court filings that were already submitted to the judge. And then I felt like it felt a little disingenuous at times in terms of just the language that was used, because it was so similar to not only just the letter, but to the apology video too. And so I felt like the tone was to reach for just the heartstrings. So I felt like overall, Jesse, I think he was remorseful, but I don't know if it was remorse because of his actions and the pain that he's caused to people, or it's because he's been sitting in a jail cell for the last 12 months.
Well, then we came to the judge. Judge Arun Subramanian took a 5-minute break. It was interesting because we were doing our live coverage, which, by the way, oh boy, I was hosting for 7 hours straight. So we get to the judge's decision. Takes a 5-minute break, which, by the way, our guest Serena Townsend had said, hey, listen, I was asking, does any of this affect the judge's decision? In other words, does the judge just come in there, know what he's going to do? Is he persuaded by anything that anybody says in court? It's like, well, if they take a break, they go back, they may change their sentence. 5-minute break. I was like, oh, does that mean that he changed his sentence? Comes back, delivers this sentence. And it felt a little bit like a roller coaster. You kind of got an idea of where he was going and then not. And talk to us about how he started, what he said, and what the ultimate verdict was. And then we can get into a little bit about what the impact was in court, how people reacted to it. But what did the judge say exactly regarding the sentence?
Yeah, to your point, Jesse, it really was like a roller coaster because I didn't know where he was going because he was starting by saying, I consider that you are an artist and a businessman and your work history are celebrated. And he used the words that Sean Combs' work history was also iconic. He says it's impressive given the early death of your father. Your work with inner city kids is commendable. There's no doubt that you are devoted to your family. So I think when he was saying those words, Jesse, I think he was really specifically talking about those impact letters and also seeing that 11-minute video about just all the extensive work that Sean Combs has done throughout his life outside of this federal case. And so the judge saying there's no doubt that you're devoted to your family, but the court knows that you do have problems with addiction, that drugs may have exacerbated your conduct over the years. So this was a moment where I was thinking, oh, well, maybe he'll be a little lighter on the sentence. That's what I was thinking. But then the judge said the court rejects the defense's narrative of the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that this was just comes with the lifestyle of being an artist, a musician, a producer. The judge said you abused power and control over women who loved you. You used that abuse to get away, and the evidence of abuse in connection to freak-offs and hotel nights is massive. We saw the gashes and the bruises and the broken doors, and this is specifically talking about what Cassie had gone through throughout her, Cassie and Jane in that respect, throughout their relationships with Sean Combs, and that the judge said Jane and Cassie thought about both ending their lives, that these were very serious offenses. You plied Cassie with drugs. Your conduct went over for more than a decade. You were no John, but you were just more than that. And so then the judge is telling Sean Combs, well, you said you're sorry. One thing that strikes me is you brutally assaulted Jane. You punched, kicked her, slapped her so hard that she fell down. But I think when people think of this particular instance, well, the defense and the government say that this was one instance of physical violence when it came to Jane specifically. I think it's notable the timing of when this had happened. This had happened in June of 2024, just last year, but also notably after Cassie's lawsuit. This was after his homes were raided. This was after the video of him assaulting Cassie had leaked to CNN. And the judge said that even after he had physically assaulted Jane during this June 2024 incident, that he had said, and this was going by the court transcript, take this effing pill. You aren't going to ruin my effing night. You asked her also, is this coercive? And so I think from the judge's perspective, that was kind of a clear sign that the conduct has still been going on just pretty quickly or pretty recently. And so the judge also said these acts of sexual violence, substantial sentence must be given. So I was thinking maybe he would agree with the prosecution, possibly go for that 135 months. But he says he said, well, that's more than necessary. He said it's also not reasonable. And he said that the government's proposal doesn't take into consideration the mitigating factors, where it was the opposite for the defense, where the defense's proposal of pretty much being time served was that didn't take into consideration the aggravating factors. So that would be the violence and all of that. And so the judge said at the end, the defense's proposal is insufficient. And so he handed down that sentence of 50 months of incarceration. And the judge noted it's hard time in prison, but you will have a life after this. And so towards the end of his statement, the judge really spoke to the victims, because I think honestly, Jesse, that's something that gets really lost within this case is Cassie Ventura and Jane. And he was commending him, he being the judge, commending them for speaking out and giving a voice to survivors. He said to Miss Ventura, we heard you. Mr. Combs will never be able to wash it away. And then speaking back to Cassie and the victims, says that your families are proud of you. I am proud of you. You're speaking to the millions who didn't have a voice. Violence behind closed doors doesn't have to stay hidden forever. I know you bear the trauma of what happened. Even though you were a victim, you don't have to be. And so towards the end, the judge said, Mr. Combs, these crimes were serious. And he read bits and pieces of Cassie Ventura's letter to the judge. And he did say kind of maybe some comforting words to Sean Combs and his family, where it says, you and your family will get through this. I'm counting on you to make the most of your second chance. And then immediately after, he adjourned the court for the day. And then Sean Combs was eventually taken away. But Jesse, the reaction, I think a lot of people were surprised.
Yeah, and that idea of a second chance, it may not be the second chance that Sean Combs was advocating for or hoping for, but in light of what he could have been facing, it really is a second chance. I thought it was quite notable of the judge to address the victims in this case, because there are people who could interpret this and say, my gosh, this doesn't feel sufficient for what Sean Combs did. And taking the time to address it, I think was important, but also saying to Sean Combs, you know, you're loved. You have this love. You're giving you a second chance. Before we get into the reaction, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me we're talking 4 years, a little over 4 years in prison is what he was sentenced to, but he spent almost 14 months in prison, in jail already at the MDC. He's going to get credit, I think, for time served. So it would be 3 years. And if I'm right, that there is a possibility you have to serve at least 85% of your time before you can even get released. We are talking, what, 2.5 to 3 years in prison? And correct me if I'm wrong there. Was that, before I get into the reaction of everybody in the courtroom, what it was like, you've been covering this case from the very beginning. So A, am I right about 2.5, 3 years? But also, were you surprised by that sentence?
So to answer your first question, I was doing the math. Honestly, I was doing times tables, multiplication, division, just to figure out how much time he actually was sentenced to. Because again, these are in terms of months and not years. So yes, with some quick math, it's around that 2.5, 3 year sentence. And then with credit of time served, it's possible that he could be out by pretty quickly, as opposed to what the government was hoping for, which would have been those double-digit numbers. But in terms of just overall the totality of this case, you know, given that we thought there could have been that possibility had he been convicted of the other charges, that it could have been anywhere from 20 years to life in prison. So to see that at the end of the sentence, at the end of the trial, after we've heard all the evidence, after the jury made their decision, through everything, that in terms of his full sentence, yeah, so about 2.5, 3.5, 4 years. And then credit of time served. So it could be out relatively sooner than, you know, what could have been the harsher end of that sentence. But I think overall, just listening to 2 months of trial, plus all the pretrial hearings, because I think the pretrial hearings were very important too, because there was 2 words that couldn't be uttered throughout this entire trial, and that was coercive control. And so from my perspective, Jesse, being someone who was inside that courtroom, seeing all of this evidence for the most part that we were able to see, I was curious to know whether or not the verdict or the outcome would be different had those 2 words been admitted into the trial, or maybe if the expansion of Dr. Don Hughes' testimony would have went longer, just those type of things. But I think in terms of just initially thinking when we saw the indictment that he could be facing anywhere between 20 years to life if he was convicted of everything, to seeing, you know, around less than 5 years, I think that is pretty reasonable. And I think the judge was reasonable and fair when he made his ultimate decision today.
What was the reaction to that sentence, particularly from Sean Combs? And I understand he might have said something to his family as he was escorted out of the courtroom, right?
Yeah, and it happened all very quickly. It was like the judge said court is adjourned, and then all of a sudden, because he wasn't free to go, he was really kind of taken away in a sense by U.S. Marshals, not in a dramatic fashion or anything like that. He just walked out of the courtroom. But before he was taken out of the courtroom, he did turn to his family and he said, "I'm sorry and I love you" to them. I think maybe the family was hoping that there would be a possibility of time served, that there would be that possibility that he'd be free to go and he'd probably be back at home by the weekend. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And so I'm sure it was a big disappointment and a letdown. I was expecting a big audible reaction when the sentence was handed down, but that was something that I didn't hear when I was inside the courtroom. I think a lot of people were too busy kind of maybe calculating the math of how much time that sentence actually ended up being. But I think from the family's perspective, maybe they were just going in knowing that there could be that possibility that he wouldn't be able to go home. And so they might have prepared themselves for that ahead of time. But I do think that they were disappointed that Sean Combs wouldn't be coming home with them today.
Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for your incredible reporting during the course of this whole trial. It has been a pleasure working with you on this case. For everyone's sake, I hope that Sean Combs, when he is released, he does take that second chance, that he does grow, that he does become a benefit to society, because it can't be overstated that he was convicted of serious crimes. These were not victimless crimes, and I think the judge, the court, made that clear. This has been a really tough case to cover, but really appreciate everybody who's been following us, particularly here on Sidebar. But I just want to thank Elizabeth Millner once again, because you were terrific. You were our eyes and ears in a courtroom that did not permit cameras, even though they should, did not permit cameras. So thank you so much for all the work that you did day in and day out.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Truly, I loved being on with you every single day, and it was very interesting perspective to be inside that courtroom every single day too, but loved being on with you.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll see you next time.